71A. Talk a little bit about the damage of ribis. Okay, 1 second. Okay, good morning, good morning. I lost you for a second. 71A, 4 lines down. So yesterday we saw from Rav Huna that you're allowed to lend to a non-Jew with ribis if that's your income. Some say Iked Masla the Rav Huna Ahad Tani Rav Yosef. Some take that statement and apply it to something else. Tani Rav Yosef taught. Im Kesef Talves Ami Esa Ani Imach. This is an interesting expression here. Some Kesef Talv, if you lend money. So what's the terminology here? First, it's es Ami, your nation. Es Ha'ani, the poor. Imach, with you. What does that mean? It means that if you have a question where to give your money to, it's Ami v'Nachri. It's your nation and a non-Jew. Then Ami Kaidim, your nation is first. Now, to be clear, the Talmud says that one should give charity to non-Jews together with Jews. Meaning, if there's Jews and non-Jews collecting charity together, then one gives charity to both of them. However, if one has limited resources, he can only give charity to one group. He should give to Jews. And by the way, he probably shouldn't do it in front of the non-Jews. They shouldn't be jealous of him. The reason why we give charity to non-Jews when Jews are present is what's called Darkei Shalom. Keep the peace. It's not, we don't want to break the peace by only giving Jews charity, even when both of them are collecting in front of us. Regardless, if a person can only give one, then maybe don't give anything at the time and find the Jew later and give it to him. 1 second. Ami Kaidim. Okay. Ani v'asher. If you have two people that need charity, a poor and a wealthy guy. Ani Kaidim. Now, it's not clear why exactly the wealthy guy would need charity. Yeah, so I was expecting that concept is called what's called what does that mean? Basically, if you have a rich guy who formerly drove a Cadillac, then you can, when you give him charity, you sort of give him a Cadillac if it's going to damage his self-esteem, etc. Let's say we don't have enough money, then we prioritize the poor over de machserei, the sort of the luxuries that the formerly wealthy had. Okay. Your poor people versus those of your city, meaning your either your close neighbors or your relatives. You're poor, you're responsible for first. You have the poor of your city versus the poor of a different city. Your city comes first. Okay. Okay, so let's go through the brisa. Amar Mara, Ami v'Nachri, Ami Kaidim. Jews versus non-Jews. Jews come first. Amar Nachman, Amar Lihuno. So Rav Nachman said that the Rav Huna told him, in other words, the person has two options. He can give a loan to a non-Jew with interest, or a loan to a Jew without interest. He gives the loan to the Jew without interest. And that sort of was a statement of Rav Huna that's sort of being reapplied in a different context. Okay. Rav Yosef says, go see how blinded those who loan money with ribis are. If a guy calls his friend a wicked person, you can imagine he's not going to take too kindly to that. And very often he will, he'll take revenge. He'll figure out how to get his income canceled. So, you think that somebody calling somebody else a wicked person, that's like the worst thing you can do to him. Worst type of defamation. And over here, a guy who loans money in ribis basically publicly defames himself as denying God's existence. He brings a scribe and witnesses and often a guarantor and ink and a quill and paper, and he writes and signs, this guy is denying God. Just very, very simply, why is ribis considered denying God? So in a certain sense, he's denying the fact that God will repay any charity, which is a promise that God allows you to test him on. Right? In Amos, God says to Amos that you can you can test me in this matter if you give charity and I don't open the heavens and give you blessing until you can't have enough of that blessing. One second. Okay, Tanya, Reb Shimon also taught, all the Katsavaimer, if a person has money and loans it without interest, on him the verse states, he did not give his money for neshech. Neshech is interest, ribis. And he did not take a bribe to deal with the pure. Another phrase for interest. Someone who does these things, he will never falter. We see from here, somebody who does loan with ribis, somebody who doesn't loan with ribis, he will never falter. Well, what about somebody who does loan with ribis? Obviously, he will falter. Samar says, we see people that don't loan with interest and yet their assets decrease. So Amar the people that loan with ribis, they lose their money and they never get it back. The people that loan without ribis, they lose their money, but they get it back. And that's the statement, lo yimet lo olam. He will never falter forever. Meaning he may falter, but the fall will never be forever. Whereas those that loan by ribis, they could fall and their fall will be forever. Lama sabit baigdim. Why would the traders look? Tachrash, they'll be silent. Kibola Rasha Tzadik, when a wicked swallows the righteous. Tzadik mimenu, more righteous than him. So Rav Huna explained this pasuk. Tzadik mimenu b'leah, tzadik omer ene b'leah. The wicked could swallow someone who's more righteous than them, but somebody who's perfectly righteous, the wicked can't touch. This is a common theme throughout Talmud, that if you are perfectly righteous, you're sort of protected from, even the normal affairs of this world. Okay. Tanya, we learned Rabbi Aimer, Ger Tzedek Omer L'Inyan Mechira, V'Ger Toshav Omer L'Inyan Ribis, Eini Yodea Ma'hu. So Rabbi had difficulty with two words of the Torah. One is the Ger Toshav that's listed with regard to ribis, and the other is the Ger Tzedek that's listed with regard to a Jewish slave. And basically, Rabbi had a major question on each one. So the Gemara is going to explain the context for each one, explain what the question is that Rabbi had, and then give a resolution. That takes us until the next page. So let's start with the first one. Okay, one second. Geret Tzedek Omer L'Inyan Mechira. The Geret Tzedek that's referred to with regard to somebody selling a slave. So now, let's back up a little bit. The Gemara here starts in the middle of quoting a brisa. Okay, what is the brisa the Gemara is referring to? It's referring to somebody who sells the fruits of Shemitah. You're not allowed to sell the fruits of Shemitah. You can only gift them. They're free, basically. They're free. They're ownerless. And if you sell them, guy gives a penalty. And what's the penalty? The penalty basically is that your assets slowly decrease. First, you have to start selling your fields, and you end up selling your daughter, and you end up selling yourself as a slave. Now, and how far does it go? Sell yourself. See, so this is where this is where we pick up here. If your friend is yomuch, he's weak, he's poor, he'll sell himself to you. Okay, but not only is that the penalty of somebody who sells in Shemitah, if he continues to do so, not just to you, el leger, to a convert, shenamar leger, but leger tzedek, and not to a righteous convert, el leger toshav, to a non-Jew who lives amongst you but doesn't worship idols, shenamar leger toshav. And then it says mishpachtai, meaning mishpachas ger, to the ger toshav's relatives, zahanochri. This is a regular non-Jew. Or to someone close to him. The final penalty is that he'll be sold as a slave to a non-Jew pagan idol worshiper. That's the worst of the penalties. So Amar Mars, let's go through what we just saw. To a convert, not just to you, but also to a convert. Shnemer leger. Gemara says, "Remember the ger kani eved ivri." Evidently, what we're saying here is, in other words, it would be one thing if you were sold to a Jew, but not only are you not sold to a Jew, you sold to a convert. And then eventually, if you continue to sell the fruits of Shemitah, not only will you be sold to a convert, you'll be sold to a non-Jew who keeps certain laws. Basically, the 7 Noahide commandments. Most principally of them would be not to worship idols. And then eventually we sold to a regular non-Jew, and then eventually we sold to the prince of pagan worship. Now here is the question that Rabbi is asking. Rabbi says, I don't know what the Ger Tzedek is talking about. Meaning the Bryce here says you will sell yourself to a Ger Tzedek. A Ger Tzedek is what we call a regular Ger, a convert. Well, one second. Are you telling me that a convert is able to acquire an Eved Ivri? But we know Veraminu. Well, and this is the question that Rabbi asked. Rabbi didn't specify what the question was. He just said, I have a question on the Ger Tzedek of an Eved Ivri, of a Jew being sold as a slave. What's the question? This is the question. What do you mean you could sell an Eved Ivri to a ger? You can't. Veraminu. A convert cannot sell himself as an Eved Ivri. And a woman or a convert can't acquire an Eved Ivri either. So let's explain. A convert cannot be acquired. A convert cannot be acquired to be an Eved Ivri. Why not? Because when he leaves, the verse states, "V'shav el mishpachtoi b'inan." When a slave leaves, he goes back to his family, and this is a condition of being enslaved. You have to have a family. Because a convert is not considered related, legally speaking, to his biological family. He has no halachic family, right? Like we pointed out in the past, if you have a convert who dies without children, there are no inheritors. His assets are ownerless. One second. So because he has no halachic family, so therefore, he cannot be sold as a slave. Conditional to being sold as a slave is having a family to go back to. He doesn't have family to go back to. He can't be sold as a slave. Okay, the ein isha v'ger kohen and eved ivri. A woman and a convert can't purchase an eved ivri. Why? Gemara says isha, a woman, lav arach ara. It's not modest. Proper. What was the word? Proper. In other words, the concern here, if a woman owns a slave, there's a concern here of inappropriate behavior. Okay. Geranami, a convert as well, Gemiri we learned, the reason why a convert cannot acquire an Eved Ivri, demikni kani, deloy mikni loy kani. If you could be sold as a slave, then you could acquire a slave. If you can't be sold as a slave, you can't acquire a slave either. So basically the point that Rebbe's question in a nutshell was, how can you say that that the punishment for selling the fruits of Shemitah is that you'll be sold to a convert? A convert cannot acquire a slave. And the resolution is, Amar Menachem bar Yitzchak, Eini kaina, you don't acquire him, V'dina ki Yisrael, meaning you don't a convert cannot acquire a Jewish slave as a Jew. But he could acquire a slave under the laws of slavery of a non-Jew. Let's explain. Meaning there's two sets of laws for a Jewish slave. There's a Jewish slave sold to a Jew. There's a Jewish slave sold to a non-Jew. Obviously, the second category is far more lenient for the owner. And that's the category that a convert has. Tanya, we learned Tanirtza, somebody who gets his ear drilled, someone who's sold as a slave to a non-Jew. The law here is that if the master dies, they don't have to serve the children. Okay, basically, 1 second. Okay, so this is the in this context, we should really say the opposite. In this context, we see actually here there's a leniency in a Jew can inherit a slave. His Jewish slave is inherited to his children. A convert cannot inherit his Jewish slave to his children, even if he has children. So that would be a leniency that would not be the fact that it can be inherited is something that the convert would not have because he doesn't buy the slave as a Jew, he buys the slave as a non-Jew. Let's continue. A woman and a convert cannot acquire a slave. So Gemara says, name and the lake of Shimon Gamliel. Let's say this does not follow the opinion of Shimon Gamliel. The Tanya we learned. Isha kaina es hashvachos ve'ena kaina es ha'avodim. A woman can acquire maid servants, but cannot acquire slaves. Shimon Gamliel Aimer, af kaina es ha'avodim, she could also acquire slaves. 1 second here. Okay, so the Brisa says that a woman cannot acquire slaves, but could acquire maidservants. Shimon Gamliel says she can also acquire slaves. So this clearly seems to be a disagreement. According to the Brisa, she could acquire slaves. She cannot acquire slaves. According to Shimon Gamliel, she could. So Shimon Gamliel, kan be'evet ivri, kan be'evet kanani. It depends on what type of slave. So the concern here is of inappropriate behavior. But obviously, the protection against inappropriate behavior is the fact that if she has it with a non-Jewish slave, the non-Jewish slave is certainly going to tell everybody about the relationship. Mm-hmm. So therefore, she is going to be more cautious about having a relationship with him because she doesn't want the world to find out about her relationship. I'm here. What's going on today? Okay. Anyway, but on the other hand, if it's an Eved Ivri who's modest, so he will hold his tongue. So then there's more incentive for her to have the relationship. You don't have that factor that, well, maybe in the future, one day, who knows what's going to happen in a public court. So Kamma Eved Ivri, Kamma Eved Kanani, Eved Ivri Tzniya, because an Eved Ivri is modest, therefore she's not allowed to acquire an Eved Ivri. However, Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish slave, Paratzla, he's sort of very talkative about his experiences, so therefore that is a disincentive for her to have that type of relationship. Yes, it is. It's very interesting. So Gemara has a question. Well, this seems to be contradicted by another set of laws. The Tanya of Yosef taught, Armalta loy tirbi kalbo, a widow should not raise a dog. The latishri barbe rav buishbiza, and a scholar should not live in her, in the same, same building as her. Basically, her next door neighbor should not be a scholar. So the Gemara says, okay, bishlam barbe rav tznielo. I understand why a scholar shouldn't be next to her because should she seduce the scholar, then they both obviously would be very modest about it and no one would talk about it. So you don't have that incentive against such behavior, such that it would eventually become public. Elakalba, but a dog, even the mitzvah mersasa, the dog, if should this continue, then the dog will chase after her, and everyone will know sort of why is the dog running after her. So Gemara says, "Amri kiven nechishadilei umtza mitzvah basra." I presume, by the way, the dog obviously here is male, because if you throw the dog a bone, it also will follow you forever. So Amri inchi mishum umtza the shadilei hu de mitzvah. The reason why the dog is chasing her is not because there was anything incorrect here, but simply because she threw the dog a bone, and once you throw a dog a bone, he'll chase you for the rest of your life. Okay. So now we address the first difficulty of Rebbe. Right, the first difficulty is what the definition of a ger is, because he had difficulty understanding how a ger can acquire a slave in the first place. And now we got to the ger toisha of Ribbis. What was the question there? Okay, Mahi. Ger toisha Amrlin Ribbis, Mahi, what's the question? The verse states, V'chi yamach achicha, if your brother is poor, umata yada imcha, and he needs you to support him, v'chzakta, you'll support him, ger v'toishav, so here's the key words: ger v'toishav, a ger and a toishav, v'chay imcha, and you should support him. The next verse is al tikach me'itay neshech v'tarbis, don't take from him a ribis, v'yareisim lekecha, and fear God, v'chay imcha, and support him with you. Okay, so Gemara says, now this implies here that if the Jew and the non-Jew are put together, it would be prohibited to lend a non-Jew with ribis. Raminu, the Mishnah we saw yesterday says specifically, even if a non-Jew accepts not to worship idols, you're still allowed to loan to them and from them with interest. So what exactly is that talking about? When we talk about a ger toishav, what type of person are we talking about? This is the question that Rebbe asked. And again, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak answers, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Miksiv al tikach me'itam, al tikach me'itoy ksiv, Yisrael. Meaning, the prohibition of taking ribis is only from the Jew. There's a commandment to support a ger toishav who lives amongst you. But that support does not constitute giving him interest-free loans. You're allowed to give him loans with interest. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, al tikach me'itoy neshech v'tarbis, don't take from him interest. Aval atanatzis loy orav. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Aval atanatzis loy orav, but you could be in other words, one of the ways to support a ger toishav is to be a guarantor from him on an interest payment. So Gemara says, Arav Laman, who exactly are you being a guarantor for? Ilaim Arav Yisrael, you mean to say that you could be a guarantor of interest of a Jew, but that's not true. But Tana we learned, Elu Ivrim Belais, to say, who violates the laws of ribis? It's a huge amount of people here. Hamal v'halayva, okay, of course the borrower, but also the lender, but also the borrower. Ha'arav, the guarantor, also violates the law of ha'edim and witnesses. All of them are violating the laws of ribis by allowing such a document to go through. Okay. Se'el and achri. It means you're allowed to support a ger toishav by becoming a guarantor of his on ribis. Sigmar says, "V'kim nedina din achri the ozal basar arva yunami the ihu niu the kashakam and revisa." 1 second. Okay. Meaning, if you have there's a problem here. So let's explain. We have a Jew here that loaned a non-Jew money with ribis. Another Jew served as a guarantor. So now here's the problem. In non-Jewish court, a guarantor is always considered an Orav Kabbalan. In Jewish court, there's a difference between a Kabbalan and a regular Orav. What does that mean? A Kabbalan is in non-Jewish court. Obviously, this is contemporaneously at that time, Talmudical times. You were able to collect from a guarantor without ever going to the borrower. So the normal, I think today, the common understanding, I don't know what the legal understanding is, but I understand the common understanding of guarantor is that if the guy doesn't have money, then you go to the guarantor. And that's certainly the case under Jewish law. But under non-Jewish law at the time, you'd be able to go directly to the guarantor. If that's the case, there's real ribbis going on. Remember, the lender is Jewish. The borrower is non-Jewish, but the guarantor, who can be collected from directly, is a Jew. So that would not be permitted. Now, just to add one more point, there is a way to make a Jewish guarantor like this. It's called a Kabbalan. A Kabbalan basically is somebody who accepts to an R of Kabbalan, a guarantor of Kabbalan. He accepts that he can be collected from directly, immediately, without ever going to the borrower. If you borrow money from an interest-free loan gemach, very often they will require a guarantor, and that type of guarantor is an R of Kabbalan, not a regular RF, because it's inconvenient for a free loan society to have to go chase down people who don't want to pay. They'd much rather go to the Kabbalan and go. So that usually what they'll tell you is something like, customarily, we're going to go to the borrower first, but we don't have to. We can go to you first too. And he accepts to be able, that they don't have to go to the borrower at all. They can just go straight to him.
There's no interest involved.
I'm talking about an interest-free loan gemach. Yeah. Obviously, for a Jew, you can't have an interest,
right?
A loan with interest. Okay. Okay. So the Gemara says, Amar Sheshes says, Shekibel of Vladimir Medina Yisrael. So they agreed he would be a Jewish style Arav. So the Gemara says, Ikibel of Vladimir Medina Yisrael, Rebbe's Nami Lishkel. Well, then there shouldn't be any interest. If there's a Jew giving the money and a Jew signing it, shouldn't be any interest either. So Amar Sheshes, Shekibel of Lazu, like Kibel of Lazu. So they split the baby here. They said, we want a non-Jewish, we're going to go to the non-Jewish courts, but we're going to treat you like a Jewish Arav, meaning that you have to first collect from the borrower, only afterwards can you collect from the guarantor. And that's why it's permitted for a Jew to be a guarantor on such a loan, since the real loan here is to the non-Jew. Because you can't directly collect from the guarantor. You're collecting from the guarantor is only done through the borrower. And because of that, the Jew is not collecting from a Jew interest. So we have this interesting statement. You can loan non-Jewish money to a Jew as long as the non-Jew knows about it. But if he doesn't know about it, then you can't loan the money with interest. What does this mean? Tana Rabbanan, we learned the same as the Mishnah. A Jew is allowed to lend non-Jewish money with the knowledge of the non-Jew. But not with the knowledge of a Jew. What does that mean? Let's explain this. So I borrowed money from John Doe. Okay? Beribis, with interest. And I want to pay back John Doe. The difference though here is that my loan was taken out 5 years ago, and the interest rate was 3%. It's a great deal. So as I'm about to pay back, one of my friends sees me paying it back. Steve sees me paying it back, and Steve says, "Been saying 3% interest a year. What are you paying it back for? I'll pay 3% interest a year. Give me the loan, and I'll pay it back in a couple of years." So Matzi Yisrael Achar. It's a good deal. Give it to me. I'll keep the same contract as you have. Also, it's prohibited. Why is it prohibited? Because what's really going on here is Steve was never authorized to get the mortgage. I'm agreeing to loan my money from a non-Jew to Steve at the same rates. So there won't be any loss. But really, it's a Jew to Jew charging interest. That's prohibited. Okay. We'll discuss the next line in a moment, but let's see it. Let's say we go and meet the non-Jew and we say we're transferring the loan, I'm transferring it to Steve, then it's permitted. We'll have to talk about why. Okay. Next category. Now here's the opposite. So the non-Jew borrowed money from me at 3% interest a year. Beribis, with interest. And he was going to pay me back. So Steve sees the non-Jew, John Doe, and he says, you know what, 3%, I'll take the loan and I'll pay back, he'll pay me back with the same interest. Okay, so the law is mutter, it's permitted. Why? Because it's a Jew loaning money to a non-Jew, who in turn lends the money to a Jew. Nothing wrong with that. There's no direct relationship. However, but if the non-Jew that borrowed money
Rabbi, I think we lost you. I'm not hearing anything.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption there. Okay, so the question is, does the non-Jew stand in the middle or not? So like we said, if the non-Jew is in the middle and he consults with the Jew, he's considered the agent, and therefore there's a direct relationship between the one the Jew and the one who the non-Jew represents, which is also a Jew, which is prohibited. That makes sense. What about the other scenario where the non-Jew is the lender, right? So we said if the Jew consults with the non-Jew and then hands the money over to the second Jewish borrower, then it's permitted. Why is it permitted? Why don't we say that we do not consider him an agent of the non-Jew, and we could consider it to be direct relationship between the Jew and the Jew? So they consulted with him. Who cares? If the Jew can't act as an agent on behalf of the non-Jew, then there is no direct relationship. And let's be machmer, let's be stringent and say, actually, a Jew cannot act as the agent of a non-Jew. And we'll soon see why. So the non-Jew said to him, put it on the ground and you're exempt. You pay me back. And that's what he did. And the other guy picked it up. So the Gemara obviously, well, he returned the money. So of course there's no direct relation. The non-Jew mediated it literally in his hands. So says, that makes no difference, right? So says, maybe he thinks the Jew does serve as sort of the Jew is lending money to the Jew, and he's only approving it. So says, no, no, he's lending the money directly to the second Jewish borrower, and it's not considered. There's no contact between the two Jewish borrowers. Ravashi says, when we talk about the fact that the Torah does not recognize shlichus. Shlichus means that you're considered acting on behalf of the one who appointed you as an agent, and the concept does not exist for a non-Jew. When is this true? But truma, specifically with regard to truma, with tithes, meaning you can't appoint a non-Jew to remove truma for you. But for the rest of Torah, there is a non-Jew could be an agent. And the Gemara says, or Bedusu, either it's a joke or it's wrong. It's two different versions of the text. Either it's Berusa or Bedusa. Okay. My Gemara says, why is this wrong? By Truma, the Torah says you can appoint a messenger. And it said, one of the limitations is the messenger must be circumcised, meaning it must be Jewish. So shlichus kol Torah kulanami mitruma gamrinan. The concept that the Torah would recognize somebody being an agent is learned from the concept of truma, and therefore has the same limitation of truma. Just like truma, in order to take off truma as an agent, you must be Jewish. Similarly, Any other area of Torah, you have to be a Jew to have this concept of acting as an agent on behalf of the one who sent you. One more segment. El Ravashi Brusa, Ravashi is a mistake. According to this version, a non-Jew cannot serve as an agent, but he can appoint an agent. He can't act as an agent, but he can appoint a Jewish agent. Mars is the same resolution. And this statement of Rashi is incorrect. So what's learned from Truma is not just that the agent must be Jewish, but that also the one appointing him has to be Jewish. And therefore, a non-Jew appointing a Jew as an agent, the appointer of the agent is also not Jewish, and therefore there's no law of shlichus there. Ravashi Brusahi, this concept of Rashi is a mistake. Okay, continue tomorrow. Okay, have a good day. See if you can try to do better with this.